circumstances. It is Peter McNabb, obviously Altitude TV. Here I'm color commentary with Moj during Avs games. And Pete, thank you for joining us this morning. Again, I wish it were under better circumstances, but just to start this out, the passing of a legend like this, as we all kind of agree, this is the greatest GM in the history of Colorado sports. What's the first kind of thoughts that hit you when you heard of the passing of Pierre Lacroix?
Well, yesterday at this time, I'd heard nothing. So it has been a whirlwind of there was a call from a friend who was just beside themselves, and I couldn't quite figure out what had happened, and then a text, and then you start to piece things together. And, I did not know that Pierre had been sick. So it's just, you're just stunned, and because, as I'm sure you guys have been talking about, he's one of the most multifaceted individuals I'd ever come across. He could be absolutely, without doubt, the kindest man ever. And if you got on the wrong side and he was negotiating, he could be as tough as anybody. And, he was brilliant. There's just so many different ways to go. So it's just really hard to understand, especially for his family. They're going to miss dad. They're going to miss their husband. And so I think initially that's where you go. But over time, I suppose we'll all look back at, because he was only, when you actually look at the number, he was the general manager in the National Hockey League, that title, for 12 years. And I was sort of looking at it going, there's 1 year in Quebec and there was one lockout year. So basically 10 years here in Colorado. And, I'm sure you guys have talked about it, but during those 10 years when this hockey was trying to reintroduce itself in Colorado, because it had been a disaster with the Rockies. And so nobody knew what they were, how it was going to be received. And Pierre, I remember talking to him, he was bound and determined this team was going to be special. But you look back in 10 years, guys, Waugh, Theodore, Blake, Bourque, Oslund, Lemieux, Solani, Correa, Andrechuk, Curry, Fleury, Keane were all brought in and put onto that club that already had Sakic, Forsberg, Deadmarsh, Kamensky. And, we were treated to here the greatest assembly of players in that era that you could possibly come across, and he just loved it. He loved, bringing in these players, and quite honestly, guys, I'm not kidding. He did it obviously for the team, but for the fans, he just loved to give the fans something special, some real reason to come to the game. And, he was just a really unique guy.
Yeah, Peter, I think it's not even exaggerating to say, and this is what we kind of want to do today, too. For people who are new to Colorado or they're younger and they weren't in, maybe they were existing, but they weren't a big fan in that era. I think what we need to do is get them to understand exactly the kind of impact that he had, not only on the hockey world, but predominantly this community, and not just in hockey, Pete, but in all the sports, because he came in with this team. They won right away, but he set a tone and a vision with this team, right? That, man, it put pressure on, I think, the Broncos and everybody else as well, because he was so cunning and so daring and so good, and because he cared about the fans so much, and he wanted to give them, he's like, you know what, they deserve this. They support us, and he always said that. And I think people need to understand absolutely how impactful the man was, not just in the hockey world, but certainly in Denver sports overall.
Oh, because, if you go back in time and you look at the beginnings of Pierre Lacroix, 20-plus years, he was a player agent. So a lot of how he treated the players as general manager came from the idea that he knew how tough it was to be a player whose name was thrown out there in trades and all of this stuff. So he was one of the most secretive guys ever. But I can remember distinctly when he was hired in Quebec, and he was laughed at. They said, they got a French-Canadian agent that's going to take over this hockey club, and these GMs are just going to eat them up. And I can remember, and because you guys can visualize this after Pierre, there was the first time he made a trade way back in '94. The Lindros trade had been made with the team, so he had all those pieces. He had Owen Nolan, number 1 pick, Sundin, number 1 pick on the team. And he had 3 center icemen, of which he was going to keep 2. He had a young Peter Forsberg that had not come over yet. He had Joe Sakic and Matt Sundin. Well, all 3 of them ended up in the Hall of Fame. And his first trade was Matt Sundin. And I can remember going, whoa, who is this guy? And of course, then we get here and you meet him, and then, because everybody talks about Patrick trade, of course, huge trade, but he brought in Lemieux for Wendell Clark, 40-plus goal scorer. He traded Oz Lynch, who every player in that Avalanche club will tell you, for Owen Nolan. Owen Nolan was a number 1 pick overall. Sandis Oz Lynch was a defenseman out in San Jose with sort of a, what was his reputation? How good was he? Well, they brought him in. So he was building this team. And then, of course, the Waugh deal. And there's some great stories around that. But, and he pushed this forward. And every single thing he did, this team just seemed to get better. And it was a talented team. I remember the DU was where they had their first training camp, and I had seen them the year before. The year before was a 48-game season, so the East didn't see West. But Colorado fans did not have the National Hockey League at that time. But I remember seeing this Quebec team going, man, they at some point are going to be good, and real good. And Pierre he had a vision. If that's probably an overused word, but he knew what he wanted. He knew how he wanted this team to play. He knew that a guy like Mike Keane, who a lot of people here now don't maybe even remember, was in his mind as important to the Avalanche as Patrick Waugh, because he was that guy that bridged the 3rd and 4th line guys with the really the top stars. You have to have those guys that bridge things, that can go up to Patrick Waugh. I mean, Keener would go up and Patrick would be asleep, and he'd look at Patrick's tie and go, no, that's not going to work. He'd get the trainer's scissors and just snip the tie. Who has the courage to do that? I mean, and so then all of a sudden, all the guys that are the 3rd or 4th, everyone's laughing. You're laughing together. And there's not these guys over here and those guys over here, because I've been on those kind of teams, and they don't win. They simply don't win. So he knew what it took to build that kind of club. And just, I could go on, but, the happiest I ever saw Pierre Lacroix was after the parade that first year. He was so proud of what he'd done. And he said, look what we've done here already. And he was looking out over all the people. And he was happy for them. The tens of thousands of people from Colorado that, he finally got your world champion. And, it was just a really special guy.
He gave as much as he got, and it's obvious to all of us who ever knew him. He left a huge, lasting imprint on this team, this community, and people like you, Peter. Appreciate a few minutes. I know it's hard, man. It really is, but you're very eloquent when describing the legacy of Pierre Lacroix. Thank you very much, my friend. Have a good day.
Well, I'll have a day.
All right.
Yeah.
All right, buddy.
Thanks,
it's
Pete.
not easy for anybody to go through that, especially if you were close to the man.
You know what? It's interesting, too, because Peter, his father, was a general manager in the National Hockey League, and Peter obviously was a longtime player in the National Hockey League. His brother is a longtime assistant general manager and cup champion in the National Hockey League. So Pete brings a perspective not only of the league overall and how the deals get done, but how a guy like Pierre Lacroix affected the game, right? He's got perspective from guys he's played underneath, right, to guys that were in his own family, to guys that he knows around the league. And I'm telling you, Kaner, the younger fans here in town, they need to know, they need to understand, or those who just moved in, that this guy was an absolute titan and an absolute legend. And you know what's interesting, too? Pete's right. You know, they thought, well, you hired this agent. What's he going to do? I'm telling you, man, it took him this long, Kaner, to basically inflict his will on the rest of the National Hockey League, and he also prompted jealousy out of other GMs. Like, how is he doing it?
How's he getting all these players? Why are they lining up to come here?
Yeah. How does this guy seem to pull off? Because he just, and not all of them worked out. Not all the trades he ever made were the best,
but enough of them did.
And
but
guys,
think about it.
Guys that he traded out, you know, maybe he wishes, boy, you know, probably if I could take that one back, all this kind of stuff. But let me tell you something, Cater. He was a go-getter, son of a gun, and he wanted more than anything for these fans here in Denver, Colorado, to be rewarded because they packed that joint early and often and never looked back.
Got Peter Forsberg, another Peter, coming up in about 17 minutes. My last thought before we go to break. Think about this when it comes to a successful organization. When you could send out a laser beam into the sky and say, hey, we have an opening, anybody want it? And superstars wait in line. In one day, Paul Carrillo and Teemu Solani wait in line to join the team. Guys like that. Guys are waiting to come here. What does it say about your organization and the person who runs it when you got the best of the best knocking on your door?
Yep.
End of story.
Talk to Peter Forsberg.